The next element that we want to add to our web page is going to be a form. If you've built web pages in the past, you know that forms are an integral part of most web pages and applications, but creating form layouts and styling them is often a little bit challenging. Bootstrap is going to simplify the process of styling the form elements and helping you to be able to create a really good-looking form fairly easily. As usual, you're just going to need to understand the Bootstrap classes that we will have to use in order to build out the form. So let's go ahead and build out our form. As usual, I'm just going to create a comment so that I can section off this part of my web page. And we will begin by creating a section, and I'm going to give this an ID of form. Inside here, I'm going to create a div with a class of container. And inside this div, we'll start off by just creating an h2. We will use our display of 6 on the h2, and we'll just say get in touch with us. Next, I'm going to create the form element itself. In order to do this, I will use the form element, and on the form element, I'm going to assign a class of row as well as a class of G3. This will allow some gutter spacing between my form elements. In order to make the form functional, you'll have to tie in some sort of action attribute that is a little bit beyond the scope of what we're building right now, so I'm just going to leave that blank. But I will go into the form element and begin building out the visual portion of the form. We're going to start off by using some divs. This will allow us to create a multi-column layout at larger screen, and it will switch to a single column layout at small screens. So I'm going to be using my call-md-6, which will allow my form to separate out into 2 columns at large screen size. And then I'm going to also add a margin bottom of 3 to the div. Inside this div, I'm going to start off by creating a label element. When you're creating forms, your forms need to have a form-label class, and the for attribute needs to match up with the ID on the input field. So our first field is going to ask the user for their first name. So I'm going to assign a for value of fname. This can really be anything that you want it to be. It just needs to match whatever the ID is on your input field. So for my input field, I'm going to assign a class of form control. We will be starting off with a type of text, and then I need to add that ID, and I just need to make sure that the ID value matches whatever the for attribute is. This is the way we tie these elements together. And because I want this particular field to be required, I'm going to pass in the Boolean attribute of required. Now that we have that in place, I'm simply going to copy this, and we're going to put our next field. This is going to collect the user's last name, so I'll change the relevant material here so that it will display the last name. And if we save this and refresh, you're going to see at the bottom we have our form elements. So this is what is allowing us to create these 2 input fields, and we could come in here and we could type our name if we wanted to. Now, one of the things in Bootstrap that I personally think is not to my liking is the fact that the label fields are a little too far from the input fields. So I'm going to go into my label fields, and in addition to the form label classes, I'm going to add a MB for margin bottom and say -0, and that will allow the labels to be a little bit closer to the form fields, which in my opinion looks much better. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create our next field. To do this, I will once again create a div with our class of call-md6, and on all of these elements I'm going to add the margin bottom of 3. This will just separate out the multiple rows that we're going to be using for our form. The next field that I want to create is going to be an email. So once again, I'm going to assign a label with a class of form label, as well as that class of MB-0. And once again, we have that for attribute. We'll just give this next field an ID of email, and the text that we want to display is going to say email. Now I'm ready for my input field. And for this input field, we're going to change the type to email. This will ensure that when the user submits this, if this is a required field, which it is going to be, then it will be able to validate that this is an actual email element, or at least take on parameters that resemble an email. So I'm going to assign an ID of email to tie that to the for value of my label. And once again, we will make this required. I'll just copy this, and our next field is going to be a phone number field. Now, because the email address could be a little bit longer, I'm going to actually change my column to be a call MD8, and then the phone number is going to be a call MD4. So because these are on the same row, they are going to just take up, instead of half of the space like we're doing with first name, last name, the email is going to take up a little bit more space than our phone number. So I'll go ahead and change the for and the ID. The type is going to be tell. And again, this is going to just verify that the format is going to be telephone. We'll have the text say phone. And then in addition to what I have right here, for this particular field, we are not going to have it be required, but we are going to add some placeholder text. And placeholder text is optional, but you can go ahead and give your users some feedback on the expected format of the information that you're collecting. If we save our page now and we come back in and refresh, you're going to see that here's my email field along with the phone number and the placeholder text. And as soon as we click in this field, then that placeholder text is going to just disappear, and we could go ahead and type in our phone number like so. The next element that we're going to place on our screen is going to be an area where we want users to place their comments. So for this one, I'm going to use call-md-12. So it takes up the full width. We'll add our MB-3 to create some separation. We're going to make our label with the form-label class, along with the MB-0, the margin bottom of 0. The for value is going to be comments, and the text that we want to display in the label is going to say comments. Instead of doing an input field, we're going to be using a text area field, and text area looks a little bit different. You can see that we have a name value and as well as an ID. These are both going to be populated with comments. We don't need the columns, so I'm just going to get rid of that. And rows is going to control how tall your comment or your text area box is. In this case, I'm going to use a 4, and then we'll add a class of form-control. If we save and refresh our page, you're going to see that the comment box shows down below, and it's taking up the entire width of what we have available. It also is worth mentioning that when my page gets more narrow, you can see that my form is going to switch to a one-column layout, and that is a result of the column classes that we're using on the various divs. The next element that we're going to use is going to be a checkbox. This is going to be present to encourage users to sign up for our newsletter. So I'm going to use a form-check along with a margin bottom of 3 on this particular div. So this one's a little bit different than what we had before. I don't need to create the columns. And with checkboxes, instead of having the label appear first, we actually put the input field first. So I'm going to make an input field, and this one is going to have a class of form-check-input along with a margin end of 2, and we'll assign an ID of newsletter. In addition, I'm going to make this field checked by default, so I'll add the Boolean attribute of checked. Next, we'll make our label. This is going to have a class of form-check-label, and the for needs to match the ID, which in this case is newsletter, and then my label is going to say subscribe to our newsletter. And if we save and refresh, you're going to see that I have a checkbox. It should be checked. Did I misspell that? So I neglected to change the type when I made my input field. This should be checkbox, not input, so that the web page knows that it is a checkbox element. And now you can see that it is checked by default. The final element that I need to have is going to be a submit button. Obviously that is going to be very important since we want users to be able to submit our form. I'm just going to go ahead and use a column MD6 for this particular element, and we'll use a margin bottom of 3 like we had before, and then I'm going to use a button and we'll use a class of BTN. We'll style the button with our teal color, so we'll use BTN-info, and then I want the text to be white, so I'm going to use text-light, and we'll add a type attribute and set this to submit. And then finally, I'm going to put the text that I want to display on this, which in this case is going to say submit. So if we save now and refresh, you'll see here is our submit button. So our form is looking pretty good. It's fully responsive. The only last little thing that I need to do is I'm going to change the color of the checkbox. And to do this, we're going to need to create a little bit of custom CSS. So I'll be adding this CSS into my base.css file. And let me just show you how I found what the selector was so that I knew what to use as a selector in order to restyle this. If you open up your developer tools, you can go to these 3 dots, go to more tools, developer tools, or use the keyboard shortcut. And if you use this tool right here, this will allow you to select an element. So I can come down here and click on the checkbox, and that is going to show me all of the CSS styles that are affecting that particular item. And if you look right here, you can see that we have a .form-check-input:checked, and these are the 2 properties that are styling this to be this shade of blue. So that is what I need to use. I'm going to go ahead and use that same selector, .form-check-input:checked. And we'll go ahead and just set our background color and our border color. And the color that I'm going to use is going to be the teal color that we're using throughout our website. And if we save now and we refresh, you're going to see that the little checkbox is now the color that is matching the rest of the elements on our page. So in that way, we can kind of restyle what Bootstrap does and style this with our own custom colors, which is what I wanted to do. And there you have it. Now we have built a form. It is responsive, and the layout will change based on the size of the screen.